Hello. Oh, did that work? Oh, have to look at things. Yes, I think it did. Yes, and then I ruined it. Great. That's good. Wait. And that has to turn off. Oh, man. I've not done well this morning. Alright, hold on. Give me a second, folks. Alright, I think that's us fixed. Okay, great. So, yesterday we re-recorded chapters 5 and 6. After going through and doing the sound effects edit and everything, we found the distortion was just too great. It was too bad. I had clearly messed up the settings on my microphone, doing some other stuff. So I re-recorded everything yesterday, and today we're doing the master edit. Fun. And we can't hear anything because this software is stupid. Okay, here we go.
Chapter 5.
It continually resets the settings. Honestly, if it didn't do this so well, right? Grab an area, mute it, fade out. Look how easy that is. If it didn't do that so well, I would not still be using this software. New versions have come out, but they don't do that as well. So,
Chapter 5. The Burglary at the Vicarage. The facts of the burglary at the vicarage came to us chiefly through the medium of the vicar and his wife. It occurred in the small hours of Whit Monday, the day devoted in Epping to the club festivities. Mrs. Bunding,
oh good, I'm just going to turn up my volume a bit. Sorry. There we go.
club festivities. Mrs. Bunding, it seems, woke up suddenly in the stillness that comes before the dawn, with the strong impression
No. No.
comes before the dawn, with the strong in the stillness that comes before the dawn, with the strong impression that the door of their bedroom had opened and closed. Had opened and closed.
Alright, and then you can just flip it around, delete any it's so good at this job. It is so good at this job, this software. Everything else it does really quite badly, but this job, it's great.
Had opened and closed. She did not arouse her husband at first, but sat up in bed, listening. She then distinctly heard her husband at first, but sat up in bed, listening. She then sat up in bed, listening. She then distinctly heard the pad of husband at first, but sat up in bed, listening. She then distinctly heard the pad of bare feet coming out of the adjoining dressing room and walking along the passing room.
I'm hoping I'll still be able to use a lot of the sound effects that we did on the sound effect mix. I'll just replace this recording. I mean, I tend to perform things at the same sort of timing all the time, so it should be pretty close. We'll just have to adjust it as we go through,
Feet coming out of the adjoining dressing room and walking along the...
Oop. A little bit of breath at the end there.
Dressing room and walking along...
See, that's so easy to adjust with this software.
Dressing room and walking along the passage towards the staircase. As soon as she towards the staircase. As soon as
If I tried to do this in like Premiere Pro, for example, that would take 2, 3, 4 times as long easily every single time I had to do this.
the staircase. As soon as she felt assured of this, she aroused the Reverend Mr. Bunting as quickly as possible. He did not strike a light as possible. He did not strike a light, but putting on his spectacles, her dressing gown, and his bath slippers, he went out. His bath slippers. He went out. His bath slippers. He went out on the landing to listen. He heard. Landing to listen. He heard, quite distinctly, a fumbling going on at his study desk downstairs, and then a violent sneeze. Stairs, and then a violent. And then a violent. Downstairs, and then a violent sneeze. At that.
Oh, great. Someone's using heavy machinery outside. That will help me listen carefully to all the editing. Awesome. People are so inconsiderate being alive around me and doing things, breathing my air, making noises. Shocking.
A violent sneeze. At that, he sneeze. At that, he returned to his bedroom, armed himself with the most obvious weapon, the poker, and descended and descended the staircase as noiselessly as possible. Mrs. Bunting as possible. Mrs. Bunting came out on the landing. As noiselessly as possible. Mrs. Bunting noiselessly as possible. Mrs. Bunting came out on the landing. Came out on the landing. The out on the landing. The hour was about 4, and the ultimate darkness of the night was past. There was a faint shimmer past. Darkness of the night was past. There was a faint shimmer of light in the hall, but the study doorway yawned impenetrably. There was a faint shimmer of light in the hall. There was a faint shimmer of light in the hall, but the study doorway, hall, but the study door. Light in the hall, but the study doorway yawned impenetrably black. Everything was black. Everything was still, except black. Everything was still, except the faint creaking of the stairs under Mr. Bunting's tread and the slight movements in the study. Then movements in the study. Then movements in the study. Then something snapped. The drawer was opened. Snapped. The drawer was opened, and there was a rustle of papers. Then came rustle of papers. Then came an and there was a rustle of papers. Then came an imprecaution, and a match was struck. Then was a rustle of papers. Then came an imprecaution, and a match was struck, and the study was flooded with yellow light. Mr. Bunting was now with yellow light. Mr. Bunting was now in the hall, and through the crack of the door he could see the desk and the open drawer and a candle burning on the desk. But the robber he could not see. But the burning on the desk. But the robber He could not see. He stood there. He could not see. He stood there. He could not see. He stood there in the hall, undecided what to do, and Mrs. Bunting, her face white and intent, crept slowly down. Crept slowly downstairs after him. One thing kept Mr.
This bit I find very funny.
Slowly downstairs after him. One thing kept Mr. Bunting's courage.
Now, what could it be? The one thing that is keeping Mr. Bunting's courage? Is it the sanctity of his house? Is it the safety of his wife or his parishioners? No.
The persuasion that this burglar was a resident in the village.
It's that it's a local. Oh my God, it's not a stranger. What the hell difference does that make? Also, later on, it seems the only thing they really care about is the gold in the drawer, so there you go.
One thing kept Mr. Bunting's courage. The persuasion that this burglar was a resident in the village.
What? Okay. I have no idea why that's important.
A resident in the village. They heard the chink of money and realized that the robber had found chink of money and realized that the robber had found the hail and realized that the of money and realized that the robber had found the housekeeping reserve of gold. At that sound, Mr. £2.10 in half sovereigns, or £2.10 in half reserve of gold, £2 of gold, £2.10 in half sovereigns altogether. At that sound, sovereigns altogether. At that sound, Mr. Bunting was nerved to abrupt action, gripping the poker Gripping the poker fiercely, he rushed into the room, closely followed by Mrs. Bunting. "Surrender!" Mrs. Bunting. Closely followed by Mrs. Bunting. The vicar, Mr. Bunting, has a very specific voice. It's a terrible voice. I made it up on the spur of the moment, but it will do. Oh, we've got some chat. Hello, says Nico. Hello, what are you doing? I'm recording. And Lazy Boy, hello. Yes, I'm re-recording chapters 5 and 6 of The Invisible Man, because I messed up the earlier recording. Okay. Hello, this is Mr. Bunting, the vicar, Mr. Bunting. "Surrender!" cried Mr. Bunting fiercely. "Surrender!"
It is a very silly voice.
"Surrender!" Mrs. Bunting. "Surrender!" Followed by Mrs. Bunting. Bunting. "Surrender!" cried Mr. Bunting. "Surrender!" cried. "Surrender!" cried Mr. Bunting fiercely, and then stooped. Bunting fiercely, and then stooped, amazed. Apparently. Apparently, the room was perfectly empty. Yet their conviction. Apparently, the room was perfectly empty. Yet their conviction that they had that very moment heard somebody moving in the room had amounted to a. Somebody moving in the room had somebody moving in the room had amounted to a certainty. Certainty. For half a minute, perhaps, they stood gaping. Then Mrs. Bunting stood gaping. Then Mrs. Bunting went across. They stood gaping. Then Mrs. Bunting went across the room and looked behind the screen, while Mr. Bunting, by a kindred impulse, peered under the desk. Kindred impulse, peered, by a kindred impulse, peered under the desk. Then Mrs. Bunting turned back the window under the desk. Kindred impulse, peered under the desk. Then Mrs. Bunting the desk. Then Mrs. Bunting turned back the window curtains, and Mr. Bunting looked up the chimney and probed it with a poker. Then Mrs. Poker. Then with a poker. Then and probed it with a poker. Then Mrs. Bunting scrutinized the waste paper basket, and Mr. Bunting waste paper basket, and Mr. Bunting basket, and Mr. Bunting opened the lid of the coal scuttle. Then they lid of the coal scuttle. Then they came to a stop. Then lid of the coal scuttle. Then they came to a stop and stood with eyes interrogating each other. I could have and stood with eyes interrogating each other. I could have sworn, said Mr. Bunting. I could have sworn, said Mr. Bunting. I could have sworn, said Mr. Bunting. The candle, said Mr. Bunting. Who let, said Mr. Bunting.
That is so weird. How much am I allowed to change these books when there's something grammatically weird that just would not exist in the modern age? It's very odd. Sorry, folks at home or watching the stream, I'm talking to my wife at the moment. There's 2 lines in a row that both have said Mr. Bunting in them, right?
I could have sworn.
I could have
said
sworn,
Mr. Bunting.
said Mr. Bunting.
The candle.
The candle,
said Mr.
Mr. Bunting. That's literally how it goes in the book. I really want to delete that second to said Mr. Bunting because it's not necessary and it would not exist in the modern age.
Public domain, you've got absolute free right to change whatever you want. You can add zombies and
Yeah, I know I'm allowed to technically and legally, but you know what duty do I owe to the book and the story and the everything?
that's your call.
It's my call. Yeah. I have made changes before, not big ones. I think this one's okay. I think I can delete it. I'm going to do it. Okay, here we go.
I could have sworn, said Mr. Bunting. The candle, said Mr. Bunting. Who lit the candle? Who lit the candle? The drawer, said Miss. Who lit the candle? The drawer. Lit the candle. The drawer, said Mrs. Bunting. And the money's gone. She went hastily. Money's gone. She went hastily to the doorway. And the money's gone. She went hastily to the doorway. Of all the strange doorway. Of all the doorway. Of all the strange occurrences. There was a violent sneeze. There was a violent sneeze in the passage. They rushed out and they rushed in the passage. They rushed out, and as they did so, the kitchen door slammed. Slammed. Bring the candle, said Mr. Bunting. "Bring the candle," said Mr. Bunting, and led the way. They both heard a sound of
Mm.
the way. They both heard a sound of the way. They both heard a sound the way. They both the way. They both the way. The way. They both heard a sound of bolts being hastily shot back. As he opened the kitchen, As he opened the kitchen door, he saw through the scullery that the back door was just opening, and the faint light of just opening, and the faint light of early dawn displayed the dark masses of the garden beyond. He is certain of the garden beyond. He is certain that nothing went out of the door. It opened, stood open.
Another weird one. Why is that suddenly present tense?
He is certain that nothing went out of the door.
The rest of the book, everything is past tense, as most writing is, but all of the sudden, that line is present tense.
It opened, stood open for a moment, and then closed.
Maybe it's just an error? I mean, I don't think so, but maybe.
It opened, stood open for a moment, and then closed with a slam. As it did so, with a slam. As it did so, with a slam. As it did with a slam. As it did so, the candle Mrs. Bunting was carrying from the study flickered and flared. It was a minute or more and flickered and flared. And flared. It was a minute or more before they entered the kitchen. It was and flared. It was a minute or more before they entered the kitchen. Before they entered the kitchen, the place was empty. They entered the kitchen. The place was Before they entered the kitchen, the place was empty. They refastened the back door, examined the kitchen, pantry, and scullery. They refastened the back door. They refastened the back door, examined the kitchen, pantry, and scullery thoroughly, and at last went down into the cellar.
Hey, say this one 5 times fast. Scullery thoroughly.
Scullery thoroughly.
Yeah, I couldn't do it once. Yeah, that's a fun one, hey?
Scullery thoroughly.
Yeah. They searched the scullery thoroughly.
How many takes did it take you?
I did it in one, amazingly. Amazingly. But I stumbled over, like, opened the door and stuff like that, so, you know, yeah.
Went down into the cellar. There was not a soul to be found in the house, search as they would. Daylight found the vicar and his wife, a quaintly costumed little couple, still marvelling about. The quaintly costumed little couple, still marvelling about on their own ground floor by the unnecessary light of a guttering candle. There's 3 really of a guttering candle.
Now, I think that's the break between chapter 5 and chapter 6.
Hence, until he is certain. The third one, examine the kitchen pantry. Chapter 6. Wait, I'm going to turn up my volume a bit. Chapter 6.
we are combining Chapter 5 and 6 into one file because it's so tiny. Yeah, we'll just save it under that. No problem.
Ground floor by the unnecessary light of a guttering candle. Chapter 6. The Furniture That Went Mad. Chapter 6. The Furniture That... Chapter 6. The Furniture That Went Mad. Now, it happened that in the early hours of Whit Monday, before Milly had been hunted out for the day, Mr. Hall and Mrs. Hall both rose and went noiselessly down into the cellar. Their business there was of a private nature, and had something to do with the specific gravity of their beer. They had hardly entered the cellar when Mrs. Hall found she had forgotten to bring down a bottle of sarsaparilla from their joint room, as she was the expert and principal operator in this affair. Hall very properly went upstairs for it. On the landing, he was surprised to see that the stranger's door was ajar. He went on into his own room and found the bottle as he had been directed, but returning with the bottle, he noticed that the bolts of the front door had been shot back, that the door was, in fact, simply on the latch, and with a flash of inspiration, he connected this with the stranger's room upstairs, and the suggestions of Mr. Teddy Henfrey. He distinctly remembered holding the candle while Mrs. Hall shot these bolts overnight. At the sight, he stopped, gaping, then, with the bottle still in his hand, went upstairs again. He rapped at the stranger's door. There was no answer. He rapped again. Then pushed the door wide open and entered. It was as he expected. The bed, the room also, was empty. And what was stranger, even to his heavy intelligence, on the bedroom chair and along the rail of the bed were scattered the garments, the only garments, so far as he knew, and bandages of their guest. and bandages of their guest. Of their guest. His big slouch.
I think I recorded that.
His big slouch hat.
Yes.
Only garments, so far as he knew, and bandages of their guest. His big slouch hat, even, was cocked jauntily over the bedpost. As Hall stood there, he heard post. Over the bedpost. As Hall stood there, he heard his wife jauntily over the bedpost. As Hall stood there, he heard his wife's voice coming out of the depths of the cellar, with that rapid telescoping of the syllables and interrogative cocking up of the
Shh. Dumb fuck.
jauntily over the bedpost. As Hall stood there, he heard his wife's voice coming out of the depths of the cellar, with that rapid telescoping of the syllables and interrogative cocking up in syllables and interrogative cocking up of the final words to a high note, by which the West Sussex up of the final words to a high note, by which the West Sussex villager is wont to indicate a brisk impatience. Impatience. George, you got what I want? You got... George, you got what I want?
I was actually kind of glad that I got to re-record these chapters, because in my first run through, I slavishly adhered to how Wells had written these accents, which was way too thick. And when I listened back to it, it was kind of indecipherable. But now I've recorded them again, just a little bit clearer, and hopefully it's a bit easier.
At that, he turned. You got what I want? You got what I want? At that, he turned and hurried down to her. Johnny! Down to her. He turned and hurried down to her. Johnny! 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 He said over the rail of the cellar steps. Of the cellar steps. Tells the truth what Enfrey says. He's not in his room, he ain't. I'm the front door's unbolted. At first, Mrs. Hall bolted. At first, Mrs. Hall did not understand, and as soon as she did, she resolved to see the empty room for herself. Hall, still holding the bottle, went first. Resolved to see the empty room for herself. Hall, still holding the bottle, went first. If he ain't there, he said. If he ain't there, he said, his clothes are. If he ain't there, he said, his clothes is. If he ain't there, he said, his clothes are. And what's he doing without his clothes then? 'Tis a most curious business. As they came up the cellar steps, they both, it was afterwards ascertained, fancied they heard the front door open and shut, but seeing it close, but seeing the front door open and shut, but seeing it closed and nothing there, neither said a word to the other about it at the time. Mrs. Hall passed. at the time. Mrs. Hall passed her husband in the passage and ran on first upstairs. Someone sneezed on the staircase. Hall, following Sips first upstairs. Someone sneezed on the staircase. Hall, following Sips. Hall sneezed on the staircase. Hall, following 6 steps behind, thought that he heard her sneeze. She heard her sneeze. She, going on first, was under the impression that Hall was sneezing. She flung open. Hall was sneezing. Hall was sneezing. Hall was sneezing. Hall was sneezing. She flung open the door and stood regarding the room. Of all the curios. Regarding the room. Of all the curios, she said. Curios or curious? It says curious, but it's a complete sentence. Like, if that was cut off, of all the curious, she said. Of all the curious. Of all the curious. Of all the curious, she said. She heard room. Of all the curious, she said. She heard a sniff behind her head, as it seemed. She heard a sniff close behind her head, as it seemed, and turning, was surprised to see Hall 12 feet off on the topmost stair. But in another moment he was beside her. She bent forward. He was beside her. She bent forward. He was beside her. She bent forward and put her hand on the pillow and then under the clothes. Cold! Under the clothes. Cold, she said. Cold, she said. He's been up this hour or more. Cold, she said. He's been up this hour or more. Hour or more. As she did so, a most extraordinary thing happened. The bed happened. The thing happened. The bedclothes. The thing happened. The bedclothes gathered themselves together, leapt up suddenly into a sort of peak. Headless sort of peak, and then jumped into a sort of peak, and then jumped into a sort of peak, and then jumped headlong over the bottom rail. It was bottom rail. It was exactly as if a hand had clutched them in the center and flung them aside. Immediately after, flung them aside. Immediately after, the stranger's hat hopped off the bedpost, described a whirl, them aside. Immediately after, the stranger's hat hopped off the bedpost, described a whirling flight in the air through the better part of a circle, and then dashed straight at Mrs. Hall's face. Then, as Hall's face, Hall's face. Then, as swiftly, came the sponge from the wasp. Then, as swiftly, came the sponge from the wasp, and then the chair, flinging the stranger's coat and trousers carelessly aside, and carelessly aside, and laughing dryly in a voice singularly like the stranger's, turned itself up with its four legs at Mrs. Hall, seemed to take aim. Mrs. Hall seemed to take aim at her for a moment, and charged at her. She screamed and charged at her. She screamed and turned, charged at her. She screamed and turned, and then the chair legs came gently but firmly against her back, and 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 impelled her and Hall out of the room. The door slammed out of the room. The door slammed violently and was locked. The chair and bed and was locked. The chair and bed seemed to be executing a dance of triumph for a moment, and then, abruptly, and for a moment, and then, for a moment, and then, dance of triumph for a moment, and then, abruptly, everything was still. Everything was still. Mrs. Hall was left almost in a fainting condition in Mr. Hall's. Everything was still. Mrs. Hall was left almost in a fainting condition in Mr. Hall's arms on the landing. It was with the arms on the landing. It was with the greatest difficulty that Mr. Hall and Milly, who had been roused by her scream of alarm, succeeded in getting her downstairs and applying the restoratives customary in such cases. "'Tis spirits!" in such cases. "'Tis spirits!" said Mrs. Hall. "'Tis spirits!" said Mrs. Hall. "I know 'tis spirits. I read it in papers of 'en. Tables and chairs leaping and dancing." "Take a drop more, Johnny," said. "And dancing. And dancing." "Take a drop more, Johnny," said Hall. "Take a drop more, Johnny," said Hall. "'Twill steady you." "Look him." "'Twill steady you." "Look him out." "Drop more, Johnny," said Hall. "'Twill steady you." "Johnny," said Hall. "'Twill steady you." "Look him out," said Mrs. Hall. "Look him out," said Mrs. Hall. "Don't let him come in again." Mrs. Hall. "Don't let him," said Mrs. Hall. "Don't let him come in again. I half guessed I might have known, with them goggling eyes and bandaged head and never going to church of a Sunday, and all they bottles, more'n it's right for anyone to have. He's put the spirits into the furniture. My good furniture! 'Twas in that very chair my poor dear mother used to sit when I was a little girl. To think it should rise up against me now." "Just a drop more, Johnny."
She's had a shock, so naturally she should get very drunk at 5 o'clock in the morning.
"It's me no." "Just a drop. No." "Just a drop more, Johnny," said Hall. "Your nerve." "Just a drop more, Johnny," said Hall. "Your Johnny, said Hall, your nerves is all upset. They sent all upset. They sent Millie across the street through the golden 5 o'clock sunshine to rouse up Mr. Sandy Wadgers, the blacksmith. Sandy Wadgers, the blacksmith. Sandy Wadgers, the blacksmith. Wadgers, the blacksmith. Mr. Hall's compliments, and the furniture upstairs was behaving most extraordinary. Would Mr. Wadgers come round? He was a knowing man. Wadgers come round? He come round? Wadgers come round? He was a knowing man, was Mr. Wadgers, and very resourceful. He took quite a grave view of the case. Grave view of the case. Grave view of the case. I'm darned. Grave view of the case. I'm darned if there ain't witchcraft, was the view of Mr. If there ain't witchcraft, was the view of Mr. Sandy Wadgers. You want horseshoe? Mr. Sandy Wadgers. You want horseshoes for such gentry as he? He came round great. For such gentry as he? He came round greatly concerned. They wanted him to lead the way up. Greatly concerned. They wanted him to lead the way upstairs to the room, but he didn't seem to be in any hurry. He preferred to be in any hurry. He preferred to talk in any hurry. He in any hurry. He preferred in any hurry. He preferred to talk in the passage. Over the way. Talk in the passage. Over the way, Huxter's apprentice came out and began talk in the passage. Over the way, Huxter's apprentice came out and began taking down the shutters of the tobacco window. He was called to the tobacco window. He was called tobacco window. He was called over to join in the discussion. He was called over to join the discussion. He was called over to join in the discussion. Mr. Huxter He was called over to join the discussion. Mr. Huxter naturally followed over in the course of a few minutes. The Anglo-Saxon genius for parliamentary government asserted itself. There was a great deal of talk and no device and no and of talk and no decisive action. And no decisive action. Let's have the facts first, insisted Mr. Let's have the facts first, insisted Mr. Sandy Wadgers. Sandy Wadgers. Let's be sure we be acting perfectly right in busting that there door open. A door unbust is always open to busting, but you can't unbust a door once you bust it in. And suddenly, once you bust it in. And suddenly, and most wonderfully, the door of the room. And suddenly, and most wonderfully, the door of the room upstairs opened of its own accord, and as they of its own accord, and as they looked up in amazement, they saw, descending the stairs, the muffled figure of the stranger, staring more blackly and blankly than ever, with those 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 blankly than ever, blankly than ever, and blankly blackly and blankly than ever, with those ever, and blankly than ever, with those unreasonably large blue glass eyes of his. He came down stiffly and slowly, staring all the time. He walked across the staring all the time. He walked across the passage staring, then stopped. Staring, then stopped. Staring, then stopped.
Look there!
Staring, then stopped.
Look there!
He said, and
Look there!
he said, and their eyes followed the direction of his gloved finger, and saw gloved finger. And their eyes of his gloved finger, and their eyes followed the direction of, and their eyes followed the, and their.
Look there!
He said, and their eyes followed the direction of his gloved finger, and saw a bottle of sarsaparilla hard by the cellar door. Then he entered the parlour, and by the cellar door. Then he entered the by the cellar door. Then he entered the parlour, and suddenly, swiftly, viciously, slammed the door in their faces. Not a word in their faces. Not a word was the door in their faces. Not a word was spoken until the last echoes of the slam had died away. They stared. Died away. They stared at one another. Had died away. They stared at one another. Slam had died away. They stared at one another. They stared. Of the slam had died away. They stared at one another.
Well, if that
At one another.
Well, if that don't lick Everton,
Said Mr. Wadgers.
that don't lick Everton.
Said Mr. Wadgers, and left the alternative unsaid.
I'd
Alternative unsaid.
I'd go in and asking about it. Go in and asking about it.
Said Mr. Wadgers to Mr. Hall. Said Wadgers to Mr. Hall. Said Mr. Wadgers to Mr. Hall.
I'd about it.
Said Wadgers to Mr. Hall.
I'd demand
Mr. Hall.
I'd
Hall. Mr. Hall. Said Wadgers to Mr.
it.
Said Wadgers to Mr. Hall. To Hall.
I'd
Said Wadgers to Mr. Hall.
I'd demand
Said Wadgers to Mr. Hall.
I'd demand an explanation. Demand an explanation.
It took
And an explanation.
It took some time to bring the landlady's husband up to that pitch, but at last... But at last he rapped, opened the door, and got as far as... excuse me. Excuse me.
Go to the devil!
Said the stranger in a tremendous voice. Excuse me.
Go to the devil!
Said the stranger.
Go to the devil!
Said the stranger in a tremendous voice, and
Shut that door after you!
this voice, and
Shut that...
stranger in a tremendous voice, and
Shut that door after you!
so that brief interview terminated. Sorry, I think I knocked something there. I have to record that last bit.
Shut that door after you!
So that brief interview terminated. So
After you!
that
Door after you!
so that
You!
so that brief interview terminated.
Nice. Big stretch. Okay. Alrighty. Now we have another piece. Where is it? There we are. I don't know whether to do this or move straight on. I mean, I am kind of curious to see how well that blends in with the sound effects that we set on the last one. We might have a look at that rather than edit this. Oh dear, what was it? Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Oh, were we doing it on the other computer? We were. Right. Okay. Oops. Oopsie. Yeah, we don't have that at all, do we? That'll be something else. What's this? Because it would be titled if it was the actual chapter edit. Yeah. Alright, fine. No problem. Well, I guess we'll call it there for today. That's alright. Thanks for coming along. Thanks for watching this video or joining in the stream or whatever you did, however you partook in this. I hope you have enjoyed it in some way or found something useful. In about an hour, we'll be over on Steve Stuff Gaming, playing a bit of Cyberpunk 2077 today, I think, because I've had a bit of an itch to play that game again, and I do like it an awful lot. So we hope to see you there. Have yourselves a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow on the other PC, so we can do things properly, and we'll do the sound effects edit of chapter 5 and 6 and see how well that blends in. Okay, have a great day. See you.